Welcome to the Dinosaur Review for Kids podcast, a show all about reviewing dinosaurs on a scale of 1 to 10 fossils before only the elite terrible lizards make it into the prehistoric cage match. This program is presented by the Stomp Company and can be heard within all the rock layers across the planet. Grab your dinosaurs and your official scorecard because it's now time to dig for dinosaurs. Here's your Mesozoic host, Dinosaur Ranger Anthony.
Hiya, all my junior mountaineers. Are you ready to hike up into the Rockies for our next podcast episode? It's definitely going to be quite a long adventure, maybe even as long as the dinosaur genus that we happen to be reviewing today. But hey, before we start on our hike up into the wilderness, remember, this is your host and your Rocky Mountain explorer, Dinosaur Ranger Anthony. And as always, welcome back to the Dinosaur Review for Kids podcast. On today's episode, we're continuing on our road trip across America in search for all kinds of prehistoric creatures. Now for episode number 67, we're looking up to a massive, long-necked dinosaur. And this terrible lizard would have just looked so majestic as it walked alongside these mountains, foraging for all kinds of conifer trees, or maybe walking up to a peaceful watering hole for a long drink. What I would do to be able to see that, it would be simply beautiful. Now, when John Denver wrote the song Rocky Mountain High, I bet he was actually talking about these huge sauropods that once lived in Colorado, and not about the beauty and the euphoria of nature within the Centennial State. But hey, before we grab our ropes, our carabiners, and our ice axes for today's review, let's update you guys on some dinopreneur news. Now you guys, just a reminder, my Patreon Club virtual lesson calendar is all set for the summertime. Become a junior dinosaur ranger and experience a dynamite summer of fun. Visit stumpchomproar.com and you'll find the link to my Patreon Club on my homepage. And be sure to reach out to me if you have any questions. You'll find my email address on my website. But a quick reminder of all those dynamite lessons we have coming to you guys this summer. In May, we're going to be doing a lesson on dinosaurs of the Great Plains and then doing a prehistoric Oregon Trail game. Then in June, we'll be talking about prehistoric dinosaurs that might have lived in the tropics before we do a dinosaur watch a movie party over the Land Before Time, one of my favorite dinosaur movies. Then in July, we'll be doing Camp Stomp Chomp Roar, our summer camp, and then doing a lesson later that month about prehistoric pirates and sea creatures. Then in August, we'll do a lesson on geological Nebraska, and then a lesson on dinosaur sack puppets. And you guys will be able to make your very own dinosaur sack puppets during our arts and craft lesson. Now, my summer is also 98% booked solid. There's almost no room to add anything on, especially any of the weekdays, but I do still have a few weekends available for some birthday parties. So it's just going to be so much fun. It's almost rock solid, just like a fossil. It's going to be a fossilized summer. Now you guys, Pleistocene the Solidago monster is a star. My new woolly mammoth puppet that you guys have heard me talk about. It's just so famous. It's a star, just like Cookie Monster or Snuffleupagus from Sesame Street. The last couple weeks I've started working him into my live events and the kids absolutely love him. It's been an ice age of a good time. Now, if you guys want to see a video of how I made Pleistocene, then head over to my YouTube by searching Stomp Chomp Roar, and you'll see how I made this ice-aged woolly mammoth puppet. And for my videocast watchers who watch my podcast on YouTube, I promise next week I'll bring Pleistocene, the Solidago monster, to next week's episode. Well, you guys, let's give a few shout outs before we start our dynamite review for today. So a shout out to Grow With Me Daycare. I visited them last Wednesday, you guys, and back when I was there in November of 2021, we took the best selfie I think I've ever taken at a daycare, at a childcare. So you know I had to do it again. So we took another dynamite selfie. It was so much hanging out with those friends again. It was so cool because I've seen that picture, the selfie we took in November of 2021 so many times. So I definitely recognized a few kids right away as they started walking into the room. And I also wanted to give a shout out to a little boy that came in with his mom just for the show. So they walked on in, they saw me, you guys. You should have seen his smile. It was from ear to ear, one of the biggest smiles I'd ever seen. I really wish I knew his name so I could give him a proper shout out. Now a shout out to Little Feet and Big Steps of Gretna. Now these ones have little feet but big stomps. These kids really knew everything about dinosaurs. They were roaring like dinosaurs, chomping like dinosaurs, and stomping like dinosaurs. Maybe even like today's dinosaur genus. They had tons of fun and they totally rocked. Then you guys, a shout out to Little Sunshine's Playhouse. We went over to Zorinsky Lake and we did an event for all their founding families. So this daycare isn't quite open yet, but they wanted to throw an event for all the founding families, and I believe that have signed up to enroll this fall, you guys, and it was just a dynamite time. And it was actually just right across the street from my house, so it was one of the easiest drives I've ever taken to an event, except for the ones that were actually in my own neighborhood. But I went over to Zorinsky Lake, and we just had tons of fun, and I can't wait to visit it this fall when they open up their real center. And one of the kiddos out there from Westridge Elementary, they even came up and gave me this big looking stick-like thing. It looked like a mammoth tusk, and they set it next to Pleistocene's cooler, and I brought it home. It was just too cool, and I have to get a picture with it. So thank you for that mammoth tusk that you found over at the playground. Now a happy 4th birthday to Camden. We had a stompin' good time on Saturday evening with our Stomp and Greet package. We celebrated his birthday with all of his friends and family, and it was definitely dynamite. It was so much fun. Now, you guys, a shout out to 2 of my new Patreon club members. Thank you to Michelangelo and Francesca for joining. I can't wait for you guys to be on a future virtual lesson, and I can't wait to meet you guys. It's going to be so much fun. We have so many exciting virtual lessons coming this summer. Then a special shout out to one of my OutSchool virtual students named David. He is so incredible and knows so much about dinosaurs. I was very impressed with not only all of his prehistoric knowledge, but how polite he was. So thank you, David, for being an awesome junior paleontologist. Now, you guys, let's go ahead and grab our gear and begin this stomp up the prehistoric terrain, because it's time to go exploring through the Rocky Mountains for our next review. Maybe we'll even find a cool log cabin filled with all kinds of old relics, or even an outcrop with exposed fossils. So make sure to stay close, watch for cave bears, and don't get lost. Let's start this review. Here we are, my junior paleontologists. We made it back into the science lab, or up into the Rocky Mountains, as we're going through all that snow, avoiding those cave bear attacks. And I even have my cave bear fossil right here that I got from Dinosaur George back in January. It's too cool. But today we're not talking about cave bears, we're talking about a sauropod. Those long-necked dinosaurs like Littlefoot from the Land Before Time. But this one is the Diplodocus. Today we're talking about the Diplodocus, and this name means the double beam. Diplodocus, the double beam. And they named this one about a bone that's under their tailbone called the chevron bone. So with their vertebrae that make up their tail, there's a chevron, or a piece of the bone that points down towards the ground, and it had 2 double beams on it, and they named it double beam, or the Diplodocus. So now, what kind of dinosaur dinosaur is this? I mentioned it's a sauropod, those long necks, but our Diplodocus is a Saurischia dinosaur. Those are the lizard hip dinosaurs, just like the theropods and the long necks. But our Diplodocus falls in that sauropods family. They have the long necks. They're reaching up into the skies, getting all kinds of vegetation from all those conifer trees, and then it falls into its own family of the Diplodokids. So this is a Saurischia, a sauropod, and then a Diplodocid for our Diplodocus. Our Diplodocus is on today's review. Now, you guys, how big was this dinosaur? What was the length, the height, the weight of this sauropod? How does it rate among the rest? Well, our Diplodocus is up to 105 feet long, from its snout all the way back to that long tail, 105 feet long, or 32 meters. Then it's only about 16 feet high, or 5 meters. So not as high as like our Brachiosaurus, who could be 50, maybe even 60 feet up into the sky. And our Diplodocus is quite slender too. This one is only 10 to 20 tons, and that turns into 20 or 40,000 pounds. Now, this is based on estimates. All of our sauropods, many times, they have some pretty huge estimates because they're vertebrae. There's just so many, and they kind of estimate on how big the gap is between all of those spinal bones, all those vertebrae that make up their backbone, their neck, their tail. So it's always a huge estimate for these long necks. But we have an estimate of about 105 feet long for our Diplodocus, and it was once the biggest of all those long necks. Or I should say not the biggest, it was the longest of all of those long-necked dinosaurs, from its snout all the way back to its tail. Now, in about 10 years, you guys, they're up to a full adult size. So they're a grown-up having those massive sizes at only about 10 years old. Imagine if our 10-year-olds looked like adults. That would just be wild. Now, it was, like I mentioned, one of the longest that ever lived, and it would have had no predators. So at about 10 years of age, when they got to be about 105 feet long, they're not going to have really any predators because no theropod is going to come mess with that gigantic sauropod, our Diplodocus. Now, how fast was this sauropod? How quick was our Diplodocus running? Well, you guys, they actually weren't running at all. They're only about 5 to 9 miles per hour. They're walking in a quadrupedal stance. Remember, that means they're walking on 4 legs, and they're more of in a walking pace. They're not built to run. They're always walking. Maybe they could get up into a little bit more of a power walk, and that could get them a little bit quicker, maybe up to that 9, maybe even 10 miles per hour, but they're more 5 to 9 miles per hour, going very slow as they're looking for all kinds of food and water and walking around in their herd. Now, I even saw an estimate, you guys, online that said 22 miles per hour. Can you believe that? Someone actually posted on the internet. You can't read everything on the internet. I try to get all my facts from very good websites like museums, science institutions, articles, and I even saw a website that said 22 miles per hour for our Diplodocus. That means it could run faster than a T-Rex. I don't think so. Now, what weapons or defense did this dinosaur have? What were the characteristics of our Diplodocus, our double-beamed lizard? Well, this one has a 26-foot long neck, you guys, that's more level or parallel with the ground. So its neck doesn't go straight up into the air. It goes more out, level with the ground, like I mentioned, you guys. And they have a small 2-foot skull. So their head is quite a bit smaller than like those meat-eating dinosaurs. Spinosaurus, 6-foot skull. Diplodocus, only a 2-foot skull. And they got that 26-foot long neck. Now, at the front of their skull, they have very peg-like or pencil-shaped teeth that were at the front of their mouth. And that's going to help them rake those branches. Their teeth are raking all the pine needles off the trees, all the leaves, you guys. They're raking them right off the branches, and they're swallowing them whole. They have no teeth back there in the cheeks, you guys. They don't have very good jaw muscles. They're swallowing all of their vegetation whole. Scientists believe that they replace those teeth once a month. So every month or a little over, you guys, they were replacing their teeth. They'd fall out, new ones would grow in, and they're eating all kinds of stones, you guys. So they're eating those rocks to help digest all those gastroliths. Those are helping them digest all that food in their gizzards, breaking down all that vegetation so that it can fuel their bodies, so they can keep going on and on with that massive size. Now they have their nose up on top of their foreheads, just like the Brachiosaurus, and that's so when they sneeze, they don't get boogers all over the conifer branches. Or maybe it's so that it doesn't sneeze, because if your nose was right there in those pine needles, it would tickle and it would make you want to sneeze. So maybe having your nose or your nostrils up there on top of your forehead, they're away from its teeth, so while it's raking those branches, it's not tickling its nose and getting ooey gooey boogers all over the place. Grab your tissues! Now, our Diplodocus also had a small brain. Our sauropods aren't very smart of the dinosaurs, but what makes them really cool is they have over 100 vertebrae. So all of those backbones, you guys, those spinal bones, the neck bone, the tail bones, those are called vertebrae that go down their neck, their spine, their back, and their tail. So they have over 100 of those vertebrae. Now, for humans, we have 33 vertebrae. T-Rex has around 60 vertebrae, and our Diplodocus has a little over 100. Now, we never know for sure because we don't find every single one, but we know that it's probably somewhat a little over 100 vertebrae that made up the spine, the backbone, the neck, the tail of our Diplodocus. Now, this one, you guys, has front legs that are shorter than its back legs, and they have 5 toes on each foot. Now, they believe since their front legs are shorter than their back legs, that they might have been able to rear up and get into some of those trees, probably especially when they were a youth. When they were under 10 years old, still a child, a baby, maybe they could have got up onto those back legs like we see the Brachiosaurus in Jurassic Park. And when you think about it, Brachiosaurus, the arm lizard, its front legs are longer than its back legs. But our Diplodocus, it's reversed, and its back legs are longer than its front legs. Now, I mentioned they have those 5 toes on each of their foot, and they have somewhat of a thumb claw. So their thumb, where their thumb is, that first finger, you guys, has somewhat of a claw on it, and you can kind of see it on my little toy right here from my Diplodocus. That was the Safari LTD version. And this one's super cool that I have here in my science lab. And I also have my Apatosaurus Jurassic World toy next to me too, that we'll talk about more in here in just a second. That thumb claw might have also helped the Diplodocus be able to climb up those trees a little bit as it dug its thumb claw into the bark of the tree as it's reaching up getting all those conifer branches. Now, our Diplodocus is very slender for a sauropod. They're not very heavy. Some of those sauropods can be over 100,000 pounds. But our Diplodocus, remember, only about 20 to 40,000 pounds. So it's very slender, you guys. They're not very wide. Now, compared to our Apatosaurus, if the Apatosaurus was the same size of length as our Diplodocus, it would weigh twice as much. That's because the Apatosaurus is wider, but our Diplodocus is more slender. Now, something that sets the Diplodocus apart from all those other sauropods is its 45-foot whip-like tail, and it's just too cool. They could have used it for all kinds of things. They have somewhat called the tripod theory. Scientists believe maybe they used it against the ground, and that could help them be like a tripod. They had 2 of their back feet and their tail on the ground, and that helped them tripod up into the trees as they're using their front legs to maybe grind up against the bark of the tree as their long neck went up into the branches, getting all those conifer bristles. Maybe we're using it as a weapon. They can whip it against some of those theropods, those meat-eating dinosaurs. Maybe they're using it for mating, or maybe telling each other apart between their friends and family. They also believe that it might have even broke the sound barrier. So the whip whip of the tail might have broke the sound barrier and made a huge noise, you guys, that maybe they could have used for mating or talking to each other within their herd. So that 45-foot whip-like tail totally sets the Diplodocus away from those other sauropod dinosaurs. Now, also something very cool is their spikes. They believe that they might have had up to 18-inch spikes that went down from the beginning of their neck all the way down their neck, across their backs, their hip, and down across their tail. So they might have had all of these spikes, and they were made of somewhat of keratin, which is like our fingernails. Or if you guys look at an iguana, those iguanas, you guys, have all those little spikes that go down the center of their back, the ridge of their back, all the way down, and you guys, that might have been what our Diplodocus looked like. Now, those don't fossilize very good. They're not made out of bone. They're made out of keratin, like I mentioned. So the reason we believe that maybe our Diplodocus had those spikes is because they found skin impressions, and those impressions of the spikes in the fossil record is how paleontologists first found those spikes of our Diplodocus. So those would have been too cool, maybe a little bit of protection. It could have scared some things away. No one's going to want to think they're going to about to bite onto those spikes. Maybe they could have been cool looking. They could have been for display, telling each other apart between their friends and family, or maybe even some mating like their tail whip. Now, our Diplodocus had somewhat of a pebble-like or dome-like scaly skin that went all across their body. They lived about 50 to 80 years in length, you guys, so maybe about 80 years in age for our Diplodocus. We can look at the bones, the rings in the bones to tell age. They lived in herds and they laid eggs, and don't even ask how we think they laid eggs, you guys, because these ones are huge. Those sauropods are so big. How did they crouch down to be able to lay their eggs in their nest? Wouldn't they fall and crack all over the place? It just wouldn't have been too cool to see how they actually were able to lay eggs. But they probably would have been able to maybe crouch down a little bit to get those eggs down into their nest in the nesting grounds, because they find all kinds of sauropod nesting grounds. So we know they lived in herds, and they probably took care of their babies a little bit in those nesting grounds as they started to hatch away and join the herd. Now, when did this dinosaur live, and how long did the Diplodocus genus live during that Mesozoic era? So this one's coming in about 155 to 145 million years ago during that late Jurassic period. Many of our sauropods we find in the Jurassic period. And then we have a huge gap until the late Cretaceous period. And that huge gap is just the weirdest thing. But back to our Diplodocus, the holotype, or that first specimen found, was in Canyon City, Colorado, where we happen to be for today's review, up in those Rocky Mountains. Stay away from those cave bears! Well, it's also found in Montana, Utah, and Wyoming. So we find a few different states for our Diplodocus up there in that Morrison Formation. Now, it was found back in 1877 by the paleontologists Mudge and Williston, and then it was named in 1878 by O.C. Marsh, the famous paleontologist from those bone wars of the late 1800s, and it's found all over the Morrison Formation, like I mentioned. Now, large amounts of skeletal casts are in all kinds of museums all over the world, thanks to Andrew Carnegie, and one of the species of the Diplodocus is actually named the Diplodocus carnegie. So that's probably why he helped get that fossil all over the museums, all over the world, because it was named after that industrialist, Andrew Carnegie. So what is going to be our fossil score? 1 fossil for some of those weakest, 10 fossils for some of those strongest dinosaurs and other prehistoric creatures. Remember that Diplodocus was once thought to be the longest of all the dinosaurs, up to 105 feet long, only 16 feet high, so not very high. They're running 5 to 9 miles per hour, probably eating all the vegetation from the low-lying trees, maybe the midline of those conifer trees. a 26-foot long neck. They have a 45-foot whip-like tail, a 2-foot skull. They have those peg-like or pencil-shaped teeth at the front, raking all kinds of vegetation. The nose is on their forehead. They have thumb spikes. Maybe they could have used for a little bit of protection, defense, maybe throw those arms around, try and hit some of those theropods with their thumb spike. They have a small brain, you guys. Their front legs are smaller than their back legs. They have those 18-inch spikes that run down their back that would have just looked too cool, and they lived back during that late Cretaceous period. Now, does our Diplodocus get a good enough score for those Rocky Mountains? Is it going to be high, just like the Rocky Mountains? Rocky Mountain High, Colorado. What's going to be the Diplodocus' score here on the Dinosaur Review for Kids podcast? Well, I knew I had to put it up there in those high 8s with our other sauropod dinosaurs we've reviewed on the Dinosaur Review for Kids podcast. So at the end of the day, since it's not very tall, only 16 feet tall, but it is 105 feet long, those spikes, you guys, are too cool. I wanted to give our Diplodocus with that 45-foot tail whip an 8.7. An 8.7 for our Diplodocus. That is truly a good score on the Dinosaur Review for Kids podcast. It is definitely dynamite, the highest score for a dinosaur that we've reviewed this season. An 8.7 for the double-beamed lizard, the Diplodocus. Was that just the most stunning review you ever heard? What a fantastic hike through those Rocky Mountains. Did you guys stay clear from all those cave bears? There was just so much wildlife. This sauropod would have just been absolutely beautiful sight to see, even from the tall peaks of the Rockies. Nothing would have even come close to the Diplodocus. This sauropod definitely deserves an 8.7 on today's review. Now, how do we correctly pronounce Diplodocus? Have I been saying it wrong this entire time? Wouldn't that just be embarrassing? But truly, there really isn't a wrong way to pronounce many of the dinosaur names, because dinosaurs are found all over the world and can be named in all kinds of different languages. Sometimes I hear Diplodocus, like I like to say, or I even hear Diplodocus or even Diplodocus. So each one is correct, and you can't mispronounce some of those dinosaur names. Just like Diplodocus or Diplodocus or Diplodocus. And you guys, they're just all correct. They're totally awesome. Now, the scientific community, I believe they use more of what I mentioned, the Diplodocus, but like I said, you can say it however you like. Each of those three would totally work within this double-beamed lizard. And even Dinosaur George says that is also true, and you gotta take it from the expert Dinosaur George. Now, have you ever been to Colorado or to the famous Rocky Mountains? My family and I went up into the Rockies, you guys, when we visited Estes Park, Colorado in June of 2021. This was for a family reunion on my mom's side of my family, and we all had such a great time up there at the YMCA cabins. There was just definitely so many things to do, you guys, and I would definitely go back. There was so much wildlife, amazing views, and tons of good fun. Now, you guys, a quick joke before we go. Where do mountains sleep? That's it. Where do mountains sleep? Do you guys know where those mountains sleep? They sleep in the bedrock. Get it? It's a bed made out of rock called the bedrock, and that's where our mountains sleep. But you guys, a special treat. Here's another one for you. What do you get when you cross a mountain and a soda? A mountain and a soda. What do you get when you cross a mountain and a soda? How about some Mountain Dew? Do you get that one? It's kind of like a pop. I used to love Mountain Dew Code Red when I was a little boy, but I can't touch that stuff anymore. Too cool. A couple mountain jokes for all my junior paleontologists. Now, a quick fun fact. I've always wanted to own an old 1960s soda fountain. And this is where people used to go to buy a soda pop to drink, or maybe even a creamy milkshake back in the early 1950s and the 60s. And I would definitely love to have a dinosaur or Jurassic Park themed soda fountain where kids could go, they could get a pop or a milkshake, anything like that, maybe an ice cream, and they could see all kinds of dinosaurs. It would just look something right out of Jurassic Park. I cannot wait. And you guys, I can guarantee this will happen in the next few years. Would it just be so cool? Would you guys come to my dinosaur store and soda fountain? I can't wait for you guys to visit. Now, during our next podcast episode, we're flying west all the way to Orange County, California. Here's where we'll find a small community called Yorba Linda. We don't have any dinosaur fossils from Yorba Linda, but we do find the birthplace of a president who will be the inspiration for our next episode. And here's a little hint for the adults that are listening. You don't have Nixon to kick around anymore. Well, that's it, everyone. I need to get to work. Well, wait a minute. Isn't this work? I love talking about dinosaurs every day, though. But when you have fun doing what you love, you guys, it's not really work. And I have so much fun talking about all kinds of dinosaurs. So always make sure to do what you love. Now remember, my name is Dinosaur Ranger Anthony, your Rocky Mountain Explorer for today's podcast. And as always, keep digging for dinosaurs. Rocky Mountain High, Dinosauria.
Wow!